you have your lesson books, we're going to be studying about the ark again, okay? But let me ask you a question. Have you ever been involved or part of a dedication service? Anything that's been dedicated? Have you attended any dedication services? Well, we're going to look at two different dedications, okay, in today's lesson. We're going to be looking at one that is closer to home to us. How many of you remember the cut-through in Pikeville? You know what the cut-through is? How many of you can remember back, say, in the 70s or the 50s? The floodings and all this that took place. You know, we had two big floods in Pikeville. Remember that? The 57 flood and the 77 flood. Well, the other thing that we're going to study about today is the ark. The dedication that Solomon dedicates the ark. So those are the two things we're going to look at, those two dedications. The first one, or the second one we're going to be looking at is going to be Solomon's summons of the ark. You're going to find that in the 1 Kings, the 8th chapter, verses 1 through 13. But let's look at the first one we're talking about. The one that's closer to home, our dedication. I can remember, because I went to college at Pikeville in 57 and 59. And I was there during the flood of 1957. I was there. Let me get to that one. I was there in Pikeville, right when that flood was there. Does anybody remember that? Was there in Pikeville at that time? Well, I was also there in Pikeville in the 77 flood. How messy it was cleanup time. But you know, one of the things that we have in our life is memories. This picture is taken of Pikeville before the cut-through ever went through. How many of you remember going down Main Street seeing the caboose and the old railroad station? Remember that when you go through? You know where the college is, don't you? Up on the hill, right on the side there. Remember that building? The only thing that's missing is this front part. Right here is off. And these tracks are no longer there. It's a highway through there now. That's right on Main Street, right there. Well, why did this all come about? If you look at Pikeville back during the flooding era, you can see right here. See how the river came all the way around Pikeville? The Bossy River, see that? That's why we had so much trouble with flooding. When it got out of its banks, it just covered this area in here. If you look up here at the top, right up here, see where I'm at? Well, look right over here. You see this bottom right here? See that? That's cedar, okay? Right through here is where the cut-through went through. Take this whole mountain out right here. when they did that, what they did then is this. This is what you see now. What you see now is this right here. You see right here, this right here? That's the part I was showing you earlier where the cut through, where the went down through there. And you see all the river that came by around through here? The only thing left is what they keep now is this pond. This little lake. All this river field, they filled in, and the city utilized it for city property. The reason I'm telling you this is for this reason. Anytime that you have a major development, there's got to be a lot of planning, don't there? Even in the time of the ark, there was a lot of planning that went in it. Well, even in the cut through here, there was a lot of planning went through it. I want to show you something. The cut through of the project dreamed of by Dr. William C. Henley is the largest. Now look at this. I didn't realize this until I went back and studied a little bit. It is the largest engineering feat in the United States and is second in the world only to the Panama Canal. It was started in 1973, just before the 77 flood, and was finished in 1987 at a cost of $77.6 million. 18 million cubic yards of rock was removed. The project eliminated the disastrous flooding of the Big Sandy River by moving a 4-lane highway, a railroad, and a river through the mountain. We lived at that time. We seen these happen. But not only was it a lot of engineering involved in it, but Pikeville cut through is a rock. And here's the thing about it, the Corps of Engineers, it took here, you can see here, looking through the cut through. 460, 119, and Route 80. And the CXX Railroad. And not only that, but they directed the Labasi Fork River through that cut through. There's a lot of good scenic views that we can see through that. But you know, what happened? There we go. See what it looks like now compared to it was back in 57 and 77. Then if you go up to Amos Park, you can look at the overlook there. You can go back and you can see south, all down through toward Jenkins, that area. But here's the thing I want to show you here before we get into our lesson. Dr. William Henley was the mayor of Pikeville for 29 years. As I said, I went to college there in Pikeville in 57, 58, 59. It was only a 2-year college at the time. It was up on the hill where the old Methodist hospital used to be. But he had a desire ever since in the 50s Dr. Hamley did, of some way of protecting Pikeville from floods. Everybody laughed at him at the time. They said, you could never do it. His engineering background was very limited, but his foresight was outrageous. He could see things that a lot of us could not see. Well, anyway, Dr. Hamlin, along with Robert H. Holcomb and Henry Stratton, who was a lawyer at that time, were the three men that spearheaded that big project. That cut through pipe was 1,300 feet wide, 3,700 feet long, and 523 feet high. If you go through the highest part of the cut through, that's how high it was. 523 feet. The project was completed in 1987, following 14 years. Now notice this, 14 years. The reason I tie this in because it's going to tie into our lesson. It was 14 years in the making for that cut through. At the time, it cost $77.6 million. If you look at 2018 dollars and cents due to inflation, the cost would cost us today around $171 million. Almost $100 million more. The dedication of that cut through finally took place October the 2nd, 1987. Why do I talk about the 14 years? Well, the 14 years is going to come right along beside of our study today. This fact is this. After King David's death, you know, we have studied the last few lessons. King David wanted to build a temple. Well, he didn't get to build a temple, but we found it where he did what? He built a tent and brought the ark to the city of David. Zion, another name for it, or city of David. And he put the ark there in his tent that he had made. But now I want you to go back a little bit farther than that. Based upon history and based upon what we studied, there was two places of worship. The actual tabernacle was in Gideon. So David had planned on moving the tabernacle, everything into Jerusalem and building the temple. But we find out that it doesn't happen that way. Because in addition to David had purchased, if you go back to where we're talking about Aurora's threshing floor, remember that? Well, that's his part right up here. Mount Moriah. Right there. That's where the temple is that Solomon built. But that used to be a threshing floor, Uriah, that David bought. And down here, as we said, was the city of David. Remember that week we had? And here's where the palace was, David's palace. Well, the reason I mention this is this reason. It took 7 years for Solomon to build a temple. 7 years. it took 13 years for David to build up all this in here. So they went, a lot of planning went into it. David even went, as we had studied, did what? God told him he couldn't build the temple. He went ahead and did what? He stockpiled. He stockpiled the materials so that Solomon, his son, could go ahead and build a temple after his death. So Solomon then, after David's death, goes ahead and takes the land that he purchased, and he goes ahead and builds this magnificent temple for God. This brings us to our lesson today. And we always know that wherever the ark is, the presence of the ark. Now listen what I'm saying, because I don't want to confuse anyone. Just because the ark was at a certain place did not mean that God dwelled there. God would always let his people know if he was satisfied where the ark was. And if he was satisfied and he approved of where it was, God dwelled with his people wherever the ark was that he approved it to be. How? By making it visible to them through what? A cloud. And if you go back through the Exodus, he used what? He used a cloud by day and the fire at night to show his presence. Well, God has showed his presence wherever the ark was through approval by putting the cloud over top of the ark. Wherever that ark was, God's presence, if it was approved there, God made his presence known. So we see then, in verse 1 of our lesson, when we get started. The reason I brought this out is for this reason. You see, any time that there is anything important to do, there's got to be a lot of background study. There's got to be a lot of preparation put into it. Solomon took what his dad, King David, and the materials he had, and he started using those materials, and finally 7 years later he completed the temple. Then it says in verse 1, then King Solomon summoned into his presence at Jerusalem the elders of Israel, all the heads of the tribes. Notice what it says. The Israel, he summoned who? The elders, the older people, the heads of the tribe. Each tribe had a member that was the heads of it, and the chiefs of the Israelites and their families, to bring up the ark of the Lord's covenant from Zion to David. Now, what happened then? He said that all of the people were summoned to be able to come and get that. Now, keep in mind, as we said earlier, there's two places of worship, isn't there? In Gideon, that's where the tabernacle is when David died. And also the tent that David had fixed there in Jerusalem for worship and had the ark there. So it's believed that there was 2 worship places. So what happens then? King Solomon then, he defers the dedication of the temple that he had built until the following year after it's completed. And there's a good reason for this. If you go back and you study, the year after, according to Archbishop Usher, one of the theologians of the Jewish history, the year after that the temple was completed, the next year, the following year, was the year of Jubilee. Not only was it the year of Jubilee, but it was also the year of the Tabernacle, Feast of the Tabernacles. So see what's happened? Now Solomon now is getting ready to dedicate the year after the completion of moving everything into the main temple that had been built. He's going to go and get the tabernacle from Gideon and bring it to Jerusalem. And he's also going to go in the city of David where the tent is, and he's going to get the ark there. So we see then that Solomon has a plan. Then we see also the Feast of the Tabernacles. Now, what is the purpose? Let's look at something. Why would Solomon, I want to connect something here. Why would Solomon defer doing this a year later rather than do it right then? There's 2 reasons. History meant a lot to the Jewish people. Ceremonies meant a lot to them. They got a lot of their training, a lot of their teachings. They struggled through life. So when Solomon had extended this or deferred that to the next year, he did 2 things. There were 7 days of celebration. Keep in mind now, 7 whole days of nothing but what? The dedication to the temple. That's what the first 7 days was for. Then if you read Kings, 1st, 2nd Kings, you will find out that also that at the end of that dedication, he sends them home to come back for the tabernacle, the Feast of the Tabernacles. What was the purpose of the Feast of the Tabernacles? It was a feast that was given at the harvest time. But the main purpose was it taught them or showed them what had happened to their ancestors that came out of Egypt. They lived in tents. They were nomads. They traveled. And they would leave their homes and they would all come to, every year, to Jerusalem for this Feast of the Tabernacles. So Solomon went ahead and he had deferred this for that purpose. Then we see in verse 2, all the Israelites, I'm still messed up, excuse me. Then in verse 3 says, when all the elders of Israel had arrived, the priest took up the ark. Now, we learned a couple of lessons ago that David had learned a lesson, didn't he? He knew that the ark had a one way of being carried. It had to be done by the Israelites. It had to be done by the Levites. So, Solomon gets the Levites, the priest, ready to get the ark. The ark is in a tent. Now we don't know which one came first or second. We don't know whether the tabernacle was moved first or whether the ark was moved first. The scriptures doesn't tell us that. It just says that they were both moved. Some theologians even believe, now listen to this, that the tabernacle, when David built the tent, that he had built it big enough to where they brought all the furnishings and everything from Gideon and put it in the tent where the ark was. There are two different views on this. Scriptures doesn't give us a clear view of which one is correct. But I lead to believe that they were actually, the way the scriptures read, that they were actually two places of worship. The tabernacle in Gideon and also the tent here in Jerusalem. Then he says, after they took the ark, they brought the ark of the Lord and the tent of meetings and all the sacred furnishings in it. The priests and the Levites carried them up to the temple, to Mount Moriah, in that picture I showed. Now notice here's a map of Gideon. Here's where Gideon, there's where the tabernacle was at the time of the dedication of the temple. They had to go up here and bring the tabernacle down to Jerusalem, all the furnishings there. They were carried, had to be carried by the Levites only. Then we see also that the tent is believed to have been in this part of the city of David, down in here. And they had to carry the ark from the tent that he had all the way back up to the temple also at Mount Moriah. So there's two different things that go on here in order to dedicate this temple. They had to bring the tabernacle from Gibeon, all of its furnishings and everything, and they also had to take the ark from the tent. And King Solomon and the entire assembly of Israel that had gathered about him were before the ark, sacrificing so many sheep and cattle that they could not be recorded. Can you imagine? Can you just picture in your mind a celebration, a dedication, where there's so many animals being sacrificed, so much jubilation going on, that they could not be recorded? There was so much going on. But they said that during the dedication, and we're told also through Scripture that the ark was not taken into the temple at this point in time. But it's believed by theologians that this part of the temple area right here was called the court of priests. This little opening right in here. This is the place where the ark was supposed to be set at the time of all of this sacrifices going on. They had not yet moved the ark into the Holy of Holies yet in the temple. But it says to go on. The priest then brought the ark of the Lord covenant to his place in the inner sanctuary of the temple, the most holy place, and put it beneath the wing cherubim. Then we say in verse 6 that they bring the ark and they bring it to the area called the Holy of Holies here. Now, here's what the interesting of our study is going to get. Notice that I said that God always lets his people know when he's satisfied with something. So now we see then, after they bring it to the Holy of Holies, the cherubims is placed under the cherubims, spread to the wings, over the place where the ark is overshadowed, the ark and its carrying post. When they set it in the Holy of Holies, the ark is placed in there and the cherubim's wings. If you study the kings and so on, the wings touched from one side of the wall to the other. And it said it overshadowed what? The ark and the carrying post also. How many times a year did the priest go into the Holy of Holies? Once a year, didn't they? I want to show you what happened here also. It says in there that after they did that it overshadowed the glory of God. Look at over the ark. Then it says also, and I'm going to read something from Matthew Henry makes this statement in his commentary as he explains this verse here. He said, the poles were so long that their ends could not be seen from the holy place in front of the inner sanctuary, but not from the outside, the holy place. And they are still there today. There's two interesting things here. Matthew Henry points out two things. Number one, he says that the poles were moved, pulled forward, so that they would touch the veil, okay, the curtain, for this reason. So when the priest would go in once a year, it would give them an indication where the mercy seat was on the ark. Secondly, it says here that it is still there today. That tells us that at the time of the writing of 1 Kings, that the temple had not been destroyed yet. It was still in existence. So the Babylonians hadn't taken over it yet. In 593 BC, it was still, or AD, I mean, it had not taken place. So that tells us that the writing that we're reading here today was recorded before the fall of Jerusalem. Then we see, and here it's showing a depiction of how that was. The ark, as you see here, the veil, the curtain, and the Holy of Holies that separated it. Matthew Henry says that the poles were pulled out so that it could touch the curtain, so that when they went in, the priest would go in each year to sprinkle blood on the mercy seat, that would let them know how to get to the mercy seat without having to have any other path to go by. It was a way of letting them know where the actual mercy seat was in the ark. Also, we see in verse 9, there was nothing in the ark except 2 stone tablets that Moses had placed in it at Horeb, where the Lord made a covenant with the Israelites after they came out of Egypt. You know, you asked a lot of people today, what was in the ark? covenant, they always tell you what? Manna, the staff of Aaron, and the stone tablets. They were at one time. That means not to confuse you. They were at one time. But keep in mind what has happened from the time we're reading here. Where was the ark at one time? It was all over the country. It was in the Philistines' hands and everywhere. But the writer is letting us know now, at this point in time that the writer is talking about the dedication of the temple, at this particular time, there was nothing in that ark except the 2 tablets that was given to Moses at Mount Sinai, or Horeb. Now, there's conjecture, let me say this, because there's always people out there that does a little bit more digging than I do, but there's a lot of theologians who believe it also that this is true, what the Scripture says. But it also says that they believe that the broken tablets were also in there with them. Well, I disagree with that. Let me tell you why. You remember when they come down off the mountain, the golden calf, and Moses tossed the tablets? I believe that the tablets at that time were consumed, just like the calf was. But I do believe that the 2 tablets, the second set of tablets that Moses got, was the ones that the writer is talking about here. This is not the first set of tablets. I think they were destroyed. But this is what, when Moses went back up on the mountain the second time, this is the tablets that the writer is talking about. When the priest withdrew from the holy place, the cloud filled the temple of the Lord. Now, what did we say earlier? That when God was pleased with wherever the ark was, that he showed himself his presence, by doing what? Letting his people know that he's satisfied and he approves it. For the writer says here, when the priest withdrew from the holy place, not the Holy of Holies now, but the holy place, when they actually withdrew themselves and went completely out of the temple area, that the cloud came and filled the temple of the Lord. That let the people know, that let Solomon know. See up here the cloud? Overshadowed. When the people were coming out of Egypt, they knew where God was, didn't they? By the cloud or the fire. Now keep in mind that this generation we're talking about here, they weren't part of that generation then. But the same God to their ancestors is the same God to them. And he's showing his approval and his presence the same way that he did to his ancestors. So he shows here that God's approval. Then in verse 11, and the priests could not perform their services because of the cloud, for the glory of the Lord filled his temple. Then Solomon comes right behind this, on this verse, and he says this. See the cloud? Then Solomon says this, I have indeed built a magnificent temple for you, God, a place for you to dwell forever. And this is a picture, a pictorial of what Solomon had built. Then he says this, Solomon even makes the statement that he knows that that God has approved of the dedication because of one thing. Notice how Solomon, and he tells the people this. God made his presence known by the cloud, didn't he? Okay? But what can we take out of this whole lesson? God's people remember his work based upon the past, doesn't he? Notice that the ancestors, when they came out of Egypt, the people at this particular time of dedication of Solomon, they were seeing the same thing that their ancestors seen. They saw the presence of God. God's people sought to honor him with their worship. Isn't that what we're supposed to do in our worship today? We are to seek God in earth and give him honor. God's people chose physical elements to represent spiritual truths. We see that all through the dedication, didn't we? God's people saw his presence among them as they worshiped. Now I ask you this question. How do we see God's presence today in our worship? Notice they saw the cloud, didn't they? They knew God's presence, didn't they? But how do we know God's presence? We know God's presence because what do we have that they didn't have at that time to show them? We have God's indwelling spirit that leads us, teaches us, and protects us. We have the same qualities of God today, but we have it in a different way than the Israelites had it when they came out of Egypt. God will always choose to live among his people. Wherever we are, wherever God's people are, that's where God will be. And that's why we, as a church, we know that we have God in us. Because John tells us in 1st, 2nd, 3rd John, if you're living for God and you're obedient to God, then you're going to know that you are God's children. The same way that the Israelites knew that they were God's chosen people because God showed them his presence by their worship, by showing them the cloud or the fire. Yes, dedications are great if they're dedication and if they look at dedications in the right way. But I want to lead you with this. It's not in our lesson today. But at one point in history, the Israelites got so out of bounds in their worship that God even told them, I do not want your sacrifices. I want your what? Obedience. He tells us today as Christians, I don't want you coming to church. I don't want you playing church. But I want your obedience. He's telling us the same thing that he told his people then. Thank you so much for your time.